Okay, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. My name is Pete Deely, and it's your misfortune that it's just me today with the guest, Professor Lucas Hubo has been called away to teach, and I am at the helm here. So it'll be me and Professor Dan McCarthy. However, we still have not been designated a performance enhancing drug for Submission Coffee. So should you want to get your subscription, we encourage you to go to the jujitsumindset.com and check us out there. We also have some fun t-shirts for you to look at. So I'm very lucky. The divine has smiled on us, it seems, every week, and it has done so again. So Professor Dan McCarthy, thank you for spending time with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, usually I am the elder statesman on the call, and so it's nice to have someone of my vintage on the line with me. And the question that comes to mind that maybe we could start with is a person's relationship changes with something over time. Whatever it is in the beginning is not the same in a year and not the same in 10 years or 20 years and so on. And so what I'm curious about is that for somebody who has spent a lot of time with jiu-jitsu, what are some things that kind of can't be known, that don't reveal themselves until you have a long relationship with it? Because I believe your practice is, what, 27 years old or something? Your practice is
Yeah.
probably longer than many of your students may have been alive. So could you talk a little bit about that change over time?
Sure. Of course. Jiu-Jitsu is a community of people and how we interact with that community of people. So as we change, Jiu-Jitsu changes.
Yes.
So when I started, when I was in my 20s, I was 28 at the time. I was a competitive kickboxer and I saw this thing called the UFC. Don't know if you've heard of it. Back then, virtually no one had. And
Right.
immediately it piqued my interest, like many people. Like we've heard from the people that have been around that were from the United States, had never heard of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. They saw the UFC and then boom, they want to do it. They
Right.
want to practice.
Yeah.
They've got to figure out this ground thing.
Mm.
So at that time, my goals were to learn something brand new. So I was more of a student. I wanted to go in and test my capabilities because I thought I was pretty good standing up. And I had a little bit of a wrestling background, not college wrestling or anything like that, but I thought that it would be absolutely fascinating to see how my skill set would match up with these folks that just
Right.
seemed to be dominant.
Right.
And so I think that your question's an excellent question. I think it's a philosophical question because as we change, our experience changes on the mat because the mat is our interaction with our peers, our competitors, our enemies, our bro friends.
Right. Right.
And then as our life changes, as for instance, I got married and had 5 kids. How do you interact on the mat when you've had zero sleep for 3 days?
Yes. Yes.
And how does that affect your ego? How do you balance working, having a family and training, which often you want to train all the time,
Sure.
every moment of the day. So how do you emotionally process that so
Yeah.
you can be effective in each of the areas of life which you need to be effective in to be an
Yes.
effective being? So I do think that it depends upon the stage of life that you're in. And based upon where you are in your stage of life, your one's life is very different at 28, 38, 48, and 58. I'm
Yeah.
not 50. I'll tell you when I get there what it's like then. But since I've been doing this for quite a while, I've been teaching for about 20 years. So when you transition from being a student to a teacher, you have to change your goals as well because you're responsible
Yeah.
for everybody on the mat to make sure they have an excellent experience.
Right.
And then you have to balance. I want to improve too.
Yes.
So how can I be a teacher and teach excellent material that's needed for the class that you're at, whether it's advanced, intermediate, fundamental, or whatever it might be. But how do I work on my game? And that's
Right.
it's very hard. I went through a period of about 5 or 6 years where I did very little work on my game because I was teaching. I had a slot of time that I could train and no one else was willing to teach. So I taught, and that one created an appointment and an obligation for me to be on the mat, no matter how I felt. It didn't matter whether I hadn't slept for 2 nights. I had an appointment.
Right.
And if you have an appointment, you're responsible for other people and their well being because they are taking time out of their life to drive, get dressed, do laundry, to
Yeah.
show up for class.
Right.
So you have to get out of your own bubble and recognize that your objective is to feed other people. And for me, that was excellent because I tend to be somewhat type A. And if I'm supposed to be on the mat from 12:55, I'll be on the mat till 12:55. So I tend to be very structured with my time. And so being a teacher forced me to do that.
Yeah.
But I struggled too because I didn't feel like I was developing a game. So that happened to me when I was in my 30s. I had a few injuries and I was out for a bit between 38 and 43. And then I came back after being out with a throat injury for about 2 years where I thought I was retired from Jiu Jitsu. But one thing led to another and I ended up getting back on the mat. And I came back to a whole new game where you had heel hooks,
Yeah.
you had the incredible blessing but advent of athletes now pursuing jujitsu. There were plenty of athletes that pursued jujitsu in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, but the pool was more limited.
Right.
Uh, when I came back, I noticed that you had folks that because of the explosion in the popularity of
Yeah.
jujitsu,
Right.
people that didn't know what jujitsu was, that
Yes.
played college football or they wrestled in high school or college
Right.
or whatever it might be, or a hockey player that would come in and their passion for their sport, which ended because they're out of college now and you
Y-
can't do,
Yes.
you generally can't do that competitive thing. They unleashed themselves into this world of jujitsu and their athletic prowess made them monsters within 6 weeks. And so I think that one needs to look at how the sport has evolved,
Mhm.
which changes your relationship to the mat
Without a
because
doubt.
it's so incredibly competitive right now. And it's also going through such tremendous growth. And it's exciting because you have folks that are bringing in so many different skill sets. And I don't even necessarily call it BJJ anymore. It's just really grappling. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. The shortest road between like where you want to go and where it's just changing, right? Like the tools are refining and there's a lot of things to talk about in what you just said though. And as a father of five myself, we have a blended family myself, and the demands of fatherhood trump the demands of developing yourself as a jiu-jitsu athlete every time. And your economic life can't be ignored. Your business has to be attended to before, for most of us, the development of any particular athletic pursuit. And as you talked about, all things being equal, I would spend a lot more time training than not because that points back to us directly, I think, right? It gives us a chance to be in pursuit of something that is uniquely ours, whereas the other pursuits belong to the community of sorts, the community of your family, the community of the people you teach. Was that a natural progression for you that you gave way from the young man's if you were a kickboxer, you were a tough, trained, highly disciplined person, I'm sure, as you are at this moment, but focused maybe more singularly as somebody in their 20s and teens. Was
yeah,
that progression towards sharing your attention more broadly rather than more specifically on yourself? Was that difficult or was that natural?
it's learned.
Okay,
The question is excellent. And it's really a philosophical question about not just jujitsu, but how you grow as a human being.
I agree.
Because generally speaking, as watching kids grow up, there's a time when you're just really trying to figure yourself out. And you're always trying to figure yourself out. Doesn't matter how old you are.
I agree.
Um, but there's that time when in order to grow, in order to become the person you're supposed to be, you measure your success based upon your impact on others. At least that's what I do. And I think that's also ultimately how you grow yourself, both physically, mentally, spiritually, with your children, with your marriage, with your best friends. If you have a frenemy, that's how perhaps you can bridge that gap.
Right, right.
because you learn to see things from a different perspective, not just can I beat him, but why is this rivalry here? How is this rivalry making me better? And if I want to beat that guy,
Yeah,
exclusive. And we always want to reach our maximum potential. And sometimes that's by tapping a guy
yeah,
or not getting tapped by a
yeah.
guy
Right,
or
right.
not getting hard pass. But I think that when you sit back and you say, the true joy in life is learning to grow and give to others. And then ultimately you get back so much more
Yeah,
because you grow significantly
yeah.
internally.
Yeah, for me, in terms of the unique experience of jujitsu versus other athletic pursuits, is that of the things that I have been involved in, the relationship to the training partner is different than the relationship to the teammate out on the soccer field or the competitor next to you in a triathlon or CrossFit competition. There's a different exchange that goes on that requires a level of honesty, integrity, because the consequences of being dishonest and not having integrity are so extreme, right? I mean, we're talking about breaking bones and choking and so on and so forth. So that it calls people, I think, to a certain type of relationship to each other. And it forces, in my mind, that growth because minus that growth, I think it's a very uncomfortable in a negative way experience. And people are, you break the community if you don't come with an honest approach rather than support the community. How,
On that point, I think I'm sorry to
oh,
interrupt
no, not at
because
all.
a really good point. Because if you take a look at other athletic endeavors, say you're a college wrestler or you're a college hockey player, grew up in Boston, so hockey was obviously huge. You
Right.
tend to have a similar mindset, a similar skill set, a similar athletic prowess, so
Mhm.
to speak, with your teammates and whom you're competing against.
Right.
When you get on the jujitsu mat, you could roll with a 280-pound brand new person who needs to lose weight and just simply needs to get into shape. And then a 240-pound two-stripe black belt that is a complete monster. And then a 125-pound female.
Yeah.
And
Right.
all in the space of 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You have to completely have different objectives with each of your interactions, and that's
Yes.
not true in in other sort of sports.
Right.
And you can have people with different worldviews in different sports, but it tends to be the team mindset which dominates the locker room, so to
Yes.
speak. And perhaps on the competition team, you'll run into something like that if you have a specific competition team for jujitsu. But generally speaking, you get on the mat, you never know who you're going to roll with. You never
Yeah.
know what they're bringing to the mat, whether they're going to bring super aggression or they're going to bring a challenge in their life and they're almost ready to break down.
Yeah.
So I think that's somewhat unique. And it's an opportunity to connect with people, but also you have to get out of your own way sometimes because you
Yeah.
might have objectives that you want to accomplish, but you have to sit back and say, what's going on with this person? How can I be the best mentor, partner, coach, or whatever to this specific person?
Yeah.
Then on the dime in 10 seconds, when you roll to the next person, you have a completely different set of objectives.
Yeah. Yeah. It cultivates a sensitivity that is not natural for most people's day to day life because I think most people's day to day life, it's about the asserting of what has to get done from their perspective. And I think I think that are mature may have a sense of what's going on in terms of their actions that how their actions are affecting everybody around us. But the feedback is so immediate on the mats because
Yeah.
if you are if you are the 280-pound monster that is a two-stripe black belt and you're rolling with a teenager who's 110 pounds and it's their third class, if you are not sensitive to them, the consequences are terrible. And
That,
every right. And inversely, if you're the 110-pound 15-year-old and there's a 40-year-old three-stripe black belt who's so much bigger than you, how do you do that in a way that you're conquering your own fears and feeling comfortable and trusting and all the rest of it? So I those dynamics to me, I have never encountered in other circumstances. I know that your life includes a lot of disparate things. You have children you were telling me about that are running homesteads. A lot of kind of interesting aspects to your life. And I'm curious if there is some particular set of metaphors or lessons that you learned on the mat that apply more often than other lessons off the mats. What kind of sticks with you in your non-jujitsu life that maybe had its origin in your jujitsu life?
Take care of your training partner
Oh,
like you'd want to
nice.
be taking care of yourself. So that's
That's
the
so
general
perfect.
philosophy that I try to teach my guys and I try to bring to the mat. So you're there to spread excellence without question. But excellence isn't just your physical performance. I've just being on the mat for a long time. I just had a lunch this week with a guy who was in Iraq and he had terrible PTSD
Mm,
and he's a great guy and I just love him dearly. But he finally opened up after 2 years to me and a 15-minute quick coffee turned into 2.5 hours. And I never would have been blessed with that opportunity had I not been on the mat.
yeah,
And perhaps he wouldn't have learned to trust me
sure.
as a friend and a training partner had he not been on the mat.
Yeah.
So there's an intersection there where we can share our life experiences and create a community because I see that much of the world is just so incredibly insulated and divided. You're not allowed to talk to anyone in one way or another. You have to
Mhm.
be very careful. And it's very hard to open up because when you allow yourself to make yourself genuinely vulnerable, that's dangerous to a lot of people.
For sure.
And so that's what we can be there to experience. And what a blessing it is to be able to experience someone's true life story
Yes.
genuinely, not that, and they're not looking for someone to feel sorry for them or they're,
Right.
everybody has a calamity and that's how they justify their life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying real heartfelt struggles that only a friend can address,
Yeah.
only a friend.
Yeah, I love that will actually stay with me forever. The notion of what we're trying to do is be good training partners to that. And this is like a tremendous example of that. This person's 24 months, 2 years of guarding a certain part of themselves out of concern of what might happen, or to then surrender to the relationship to be like, this is better if I share both who I am and what has happened, because when somebody understands those experiences, whatever might be heavy is made lighter by it being shared between people. And that's a lovely story. As you have had this long relationship and clearly you have a sense of, as we use the terms excellence, that refers to some sort of yardstick, right? We want to be better. But you probably mark progress differently at this juncture than you did early on. So when you think about your own progress and then how you advise people to think about their progress, could you maybe talk about your evolution of that thinking? And then when you're in your first month, your first year of jujitsu, your notion of what do you want it to mean to you is different than year 5, year 10, year 20. So how do you think about it? And then how do you advise people? This is the way you should think about progressing.
It's a great question. Being a management consultant, we do the 1, 3, 5 years plans for businesses. So I'm a money manager and I do management consulting and things like business mergers and all that sort of stuff. And to really understand why someone is doing something is the first piece of material we need to start to work with.
Yeah,
So exactly what are you doing here? What are your goals immediately? Where do you see yourself, being in the next 12 months, in the
right.
next 36 months? But tell me why are you here? And what will make you feel like you're accomplishing your goals?
Mhm.
So I think that starting with that question is super, super important and sometimes people haven't really worked that out,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
make
Uh,
perfect sense.
yeah, I think that if one approaches training that it's just fun, I just want to hang out with people, that's what it is. And that's
Right,
fantastic. So therefore, if it's fun and you just want to hang out with people, you shouldn't be stressed out if you're getting your guard passed or if you're getting tapped out.
right.
Some people, it's purely physical fitness, which is fantastic. So you should put yourself Like, for instance, on Saturday mornings, we have a fundamentals class, which is pretty much driven towards cardio, high performance, and stretching. So, and I say high performance, what I mean is you're constantly moving. So someone with a messed up hip or a messed up back can come and they're going to get the best possible workout that they can get,
Right.
because we recognize that a number of people in our club were a little bit nervous to come to open mat because they
Yeah.
might get squashed. But and so the open mat became a time where there was an X on their opportunity box. And we don't want X's on opportunity boxes.
Right.
We want the check mark on that. And so this gave people an opportunity to get on the mat, get a workout in, and have some fun and get and shift their mental mindset. And for the rest of the weekend, they should feel like I accomplished something and I
Right.
got better.
Yeah.
So that's, from my perspective, that's where I try to meet people, is more on an individual basis. Then when I set up my group class structure, we try to set up the group class structure and we notify people, hey, we think this is what your goal set is. Maybe a class like this would benefit you.
Right.
Uh, so as a teacher, that's the way I look at it. As a practitioner, I actually feel like I'm learning more now than I've ever learned in my life.
How
I
interesting.
really I get a kick out of it when people say I'm 30, I'm too old and tired to deal with it. And I just
Yeah.
laugh. In fact, in this past year, I hadn't competed in a little bit. And I talked to my partner, Joe, and we had a guy in for a seminar. His name's Chris Wojcik. And Chris is really good. And he motivated me to compete, but primarily because there were a bunch of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that were scared to compete.
Yeah.
And I also train with Samuel Braga. I don't know if Samuel, but he's amazing. He's one of the untold brilliant jiu-jitsu
Okay.
practitioner in the world. Samuel Braga is amazing. So he invented the Berimbolo. He's had wars with Rafa Mendez. He's 13-time world champion, but he's an amazing guy that you might want to get on your podcast.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd
Uh,
love to.
yeah, super bright, super, super innovative. So I bring that up because I train over there and I train at my own academy because I just love Sam. And so I went out and I started competing again. And so I had to completely change my goal sets. But what I found is when I started competing, I had guys coming up to me and saying, I heard you competed. That's awesome. I think I might do it too.
Yes.
So I think that's at this stage in my life, I'd like to go out and win every match. I'd like to go out and continue to improve, but it's also the impact that I can bring to the
Yeah.
folks in the community.
Yeah. And I feel very strongly about that myself. And for me, I compete as frequently as possible, but I have very little attachment to the outcome. And a lot of my motivation, nobody's listening, so it's just you and I here, Professor Dan. A lot of my motivation is frankly for my children. And this is what I mean by that, not to see their dad in a particular light, but it is to have a sense of you don't relinquish as you go along in your life your relationship to your body as effective. I think that we talk about that 30-year-old saying, I'm too tired. I listen to 30-plus-year-old people tell me how old they are and so on and so forth. And I feel like it's a real lost opportunity to be vigorous in your life. And then as you go along, you're conceding things that I don't think you should concede because I feel like there's a very strong relationship between the way that you treat your body and the way you live your life. And not that I'm by no way, shape, or form am I pristine about that, but I'm cognizant of that connection. And there's nothing that focuses the experience like competition. So when I'm in a competitive setting, even though I'm not attached to the outcome in any real way, I do want to win. Like, I
Yeah.
still all things being equal, I'm doing the best I can, and that creates a level of exertion that I can't replicate any other way. Um, and I think that trying to encourage the people around me that I don't have a single joint on my body that works properly. Like, I don't the miles on this car are substantial, and if I can compete and go out there and work around the things that I have to work around, and first of all, I'm a beginner, I'm a blue belt. I mean, there's lots of reasons to shy away from competition on the surface, but I embrace it and I hope to have the people around me feel like, oh, There's not a point in my life where I feel like, oh, these things are not available to me. They're available to you in kind, maybe not in degree. I don't know that I'm on my way to any global recognition as a practitioner of jujitsu. That is unlikely in my future. But in terms of my own personal journey, it has mattered. Have you seen that um, impact of your encouragement to put people in those uncomfortable situations play out very positively? What's been your observation when people see you and they go, "Oh, you know what? I should try that."
Yeah, it's definitely been positive without question. And I think that what it's done is it's changed the conversation in the room a little bit because we don't hear so much of the chatter, oh, I'm 30, I'm too old to do this.
Right.
One of my objectives is to show up every single day on the mat and give my maximum effort. And that doesn't mean that I'm out there going crazy trying to rip people's heads off because that's not my game. That's not what I try to do. But what I do is when I'm on the mat, I take it seriously. I
Mhm.
try to show the guys that I take it seriously with a smile on my face
Right.
and I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But whether teaching an escape from mount or teaching the matrix, which is one of my favorite moves, every detail matters. And when I'm showing a move, I show where each finger needs to go, what tendon it's grabbing, how
Interesting.
you're tipping the person over. And my objective is to show excitement on the mat because I believe that excitement on the mat is contagious.
Yes.
And when I was, I just went out to Nashville and I had another competition. I won both the competitions and that was fun. But what was more important is that there were like 50 guys that I didn't know there and they were
Yeah.
all younger and things went well. It was very tough competition and things went really well. But before I got on the mat, I was smiling. I was excited. After one of my matches, one of the other guys just ran off after what happened. But I gave the guy a big hug and we walked off
Yeah.
the mat. Me basically having my hand over his arm. I was like 6 inches taller than him. He was a tank. I'm like, but we had a tremendous amount of fun. And so my objective, I knew that my students and the people that I didn't know would see what we were doing and how we composed ourselves.
Yes.
And I want that to be a model for them to follow.
Yeah. I love that. And in some ways, it is unlike other opportunities to model the behavior because the in for me in our 50s and what I presume to be as you and I compete in our 60s and 70s, um,
Yeah.
there's a relationship to the competitive process that just I don't think you can have when you're in your 20s because the accomplishments of your life are just different, and
Yeah.
to locate the experience within other things, it's too much to ask of somebody, I think, to have that level of maturity because you haven't had the opportunity to like, what does it mean to see a child come into the world? And that child is your child, and you're responsible
Yep.
for that child. Those are without having that experience, you can't have the effect of that experience as well. So I love what you're saying, and that turning those circumstances into an opportunity to connect with people rather than an opportunity to be disconnected from them, where the competition is actually something that brings you closer together. You walked off as friends, even having given your best efforts to. And I think there are many other environments, business included, where those skills are very transferable and produce outsized outcomes. I think about my own business life, not seeing negotiation as a set of competing adversarial, but rather how do we make these things work together is a
Yeah.
very close analogy to what you just said to me.
100%. That's exactly right. If we both garner an excellent experience, we both win, whether it's business or
Yes.
whether it's on the mat, because we both need one another. There needs to be a
Yes.
buyer and a seller. How can we make that an excellent experience?
Yeah. When you think about your years of teaching, what did we ask this question frequently? Is there a story that stands out um, above other stories about how you observe how jujitsu changed a person's life? I've talked to so many people and I've heard amazing things. I'm curious if you have one that you're like, you know what, this one stays with me when I get asked that question.
Let's see. I have a number of experiences. I think that I'll stay focused on what most recently happened with my friend whom we went out to coffee with that turned into the 2.5 hour
Oh, yeah.
lunch. What I think that when you put yourself out there, you make yourself vulnerable, but you experience things that you never you couldn't even conceive that you
Yes.
would expect. That
Yeah.
level of emotional vulnerability as well as attachment and
Mhm.
the camaraderie, you can't plot that on a chart.
Yeah.
It's immaterial without question. And the impact that I think that we can make on people, and in particular with this one gentleman, has filtered over not just into his life, but the way he's interacted with other people. So it's
Yes.
somewhat of a butterfly effect, if
Mhm.
you will. There's the jujitsu meme, jujitsu saved my life.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily ascribe to that meme. What I ascribe to is being on the mat together ended up having us both meet each other where we needed to meet one another. And
Yeah.
he made me grow
Yeah.
much, if not more, because I found emotional depth that I didn't know that I had and didn't know that was possible.
Yeah.
So rather than talk about how it might have affected him, I drove away from that and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm
Yeah.
55 years. I haven't had that sort of
Yeah.
experience before. And it was truly a blessing and it was remarkable. It was truly remarkable.
Yeah.
So, so sometimes we look to affect other people, but when other people affect us, well,
Yeah,
even
they're
more.
often the more profound end of the experience. Uh, when we've seen these studies over the years of the trauma of, say, the Holocaust, and how the trauma of the Holocaust studied the change in DNA that actually can last from one generation to the next, and how those terrible experiences can have echoes deep into the history of a family. I also believe that the power of being well loved, of being well taken care of, doesn't just stop in that moment, but instead has echoes well past those experiences. And in my family, my grandfathers were extraordinary people who died very young, but I got to experience them at least to a certain length of time. But the love in which they gave the family lasted well past their life on earth, and that the things that they were doing to help my children, the people in our circle, mattered even though they were no longer alive. And those type of butterfly effects of what happened between you and this person, I believe, echo past those particular moments. My mom used to make a joke when about the news. She says, "We never turn on the news and say, 'Today, 700 million parents hug their children.' Like we are fed so much reason to feel bad and uncomfortable when there's so much power and things that are good going on in the world."
There's a lot of opportunity and division.
Yeah,
And
sadly.
so that's a longer story. That's a whole another podcast. But
Yeah.
if you can buck the trend
Yes.
and change and reject that notion. It doesn't mean that everybody is always loving one another and everyone's always right. What it means is that you show other people respect and love, even if you disagree with them, and you have the guts to say, my perspective is this, your perspective is that, but you know what? Even though my perspective is different than yours, I still love you and
Yeah,
I'm going
and
to
that
still prioritize you.
yes, and the jujitsu role, every single jujitsu role is exactly that writ large. Someone's trying to assert a point of view, and somebody's trying to assert a different point of view. And at the end of the day, it doesn't have to end in disaster. And that to me is the thesis statement for the podcast is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That you can
Yep.
be uncomfortable in circumstances that don't destroy you is I think a strengthening activity. And that notion of being in disagreement, in a vigorous disagreement where there's a lot of energy there, and to not be afraid of that is something I think we could use, that we could develop that muscle, that you can be safe asserting a point of view strongly, and you can still, and you may be wrong and you can learn something, or you may be wrong and you just need to tap out.
That's right.
you know Both things are okay in my mind.
That's right. That's right. That was a really neat rabbit trail that we went down. I love that.
Yeah.
And to to revisit your earlier or your question, which led down this wonderful rabbit trail, is what am I doing at 55, and how do I view my training, and how has it changed over
Mhm.
time? I want to encourage people that are older. You can grow and accomplish and improve, at least in my experience, until age 55. I've had more improvement on the mat. I'm a
Mhm.
better competitor
That's
than I was
interesting.
when I was 35. I would beat myself
Wow.
right now when I was 35. It takes a lot more effort. Like, for instance, in the morning when I get up, sometimes it's hard to get out of bed, but the way that you feel when you get out of bed isn't the way you're going to feel in 2 hours.
Right.
And so you have to do things. It's fine if you drink, if people drink, I don't have a problem with that. But I stopped drinking because I had kids. I wasn't ever a heavy drinker or anything like that. But I bring that up because everything that I put in my body, I pay attention to.
Yeah.
Because in order to be able to be on the mat with these young 28, 30-year olds that are all fired up, I've got to be in peak condition. So I lift 3 days a week. I do lots of plyometrics. I listen to the personal trainers that come to the gym, and they give me very specific routines to help heal my weaknesses. Cause like you, it's hard. It's really hard,
Yeah.
but you can address a number of your weaknesses, and you can still have at 55, 85% of the ability that you had at 30.
Yeah.
And but am I using as close to 100% of the 85%? Because a lot of people, when you're 100%, are using 40%.
Right.
So you get that special athlete like a Michael Jordan or various other folks like Gary Tonin, people like that, that are in the high 90s out of their 100,
Yeah.
or maybe Michael Jordan 115. Basically, what you do, what the way that I look at things is I have a set of abilities. I have a set of limitations. I'm going to focus on strengthening my limitations and maximizing my abilities and doing
Yes.
everything I can to take what I have and to bring the best I can to the mat every single day. One thing that has changed is I used to wrestle with guys that were a lot bigger.
Mm.
Now, actually, Bernardo Faria, I was an instructor with Bernardo Faria. Bernardo, a good friend of mine, and he told me when I turned 50, he said, Dan, you're no longer allowed to roll with anyone 15 pounds bigger than you. Unless there's an agreement there, unless you can trust the person and you can get it. Because the long and short of it is I can be in 100% of my 85% at that time, but my tendons are still 50 years old.
Right. Right.
And that doesn't matter. You can't strengthen your tendons. So one thing that I need to be careful of is the weight of people
Yes.
that roll with. I don't mind if people go for heel hooks. I'm good. I have a pretty good leg game. I work it all the time. So I'm not afraid of the leg game at all. But if someone's 250 pounds sitting on you and they do everything right and they move the wrong way, I could be fine on the mat. But when I drive away, that tendon just pops out and then I'm done. You
Yeah. Yeah.
know?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. As a beginner, when I walk into these competitive environments, and when I think about it, what it reminds me of when I'm surveying the beginners to the not beginners is like when you teach soccer to children, they're all bunched on the ball. Nobody's in their place. There's a lot of energy being spent for very little activity. And when I look at myself as a beginner, I'm frenetic and ineffective. And when I look at the black belt, the movements are elegant. There's not wasted movement in time. It is a much more effortless thing to observe. And that, so as I think about being an older person who will persist until hopefully till the end, being able to develop an elegant relationship to these movements in which my whatever percentage I'm at is expressed as perfectly as possible, that certainly, no matter what age you are, if you can execute jujitsu movements as they are actually meant to be done, it won't matter if somebody's younger and more athletic but don't understand the movement. You can participate with them uh, in an equal manner or close to it. I think, in my opinion. I don't have that efficiency or elegance currently. So I'm like have the disadvantage of being older and not skilled. I work my way through my practice, being mindful of all of those things, which just forces a high level of humility into my my practice all the time.
Absolutely. And a good example is I've done some stand up over my career, but I've actively started doing wrestling class this week, this year when I was 54. Now I'm 55. So I was a beginner with the basics and fundamentals of wrestling. And suddenly, from being graceful to being incredibly awkward, I
Oh
was
yeah,
very, I felt out of place. I felt like I didn't know where to go, what to do. And
hmm
my mind was locked up and my body wasn't following a natural
yeah,
progression it done 8 billion times because I think a lot of that elegance comes from repetition
sure,
and your mind isn't firing, your body and your mind are in sync. And so part of the reason it looks elegant is because your moves are efficient because you've practiced them so many times. And then
right,
suddenly I started wrestling because I thought it would be wicked fun.
hmm
And I was incredibly awkward.
yeah,
And
sure,
now it's gotten a lot better. It takes time to do that, but I think that back to the jujitsu mindset, when you're first starting or you're just starting to gain momentum, you really have to practice a consistent set of movements. Some people say 1,000 times, some people say more than that, but you have to be committed to being in the game under pressure 50% pressure, practice, no pressure. You have to be willing to have your mind fully engaged with your body to make sure you're perfecting the move. And then you do it over and over and over again. Like, for instance, one thing that we emphasize at our school is guard retention. And where do you put your feet? Why do you put your feet there? Where you shouldn't be on your spine. You shouldn't be on your shoulders. Now, that's for 95% of people. There are certain people that can be on their spine and their shoulders,
yeah,
but let's
right,
just say the vast majority of people should always be on your hip. Your head should be up off the mat. You should be reaching with your top hand, not reaching with your bottom hand. But in order to become excellent at guard retention, so it seems effortless, or how many times have we watched a match where someone looks like their guard was just about pass and then suddenly they're submitting the guy? It's
right,
because they already knew they had done that 5,000 times and they had
sure.
been in that position 5,000 times and their body just naturally found the gaps because they had created the gaps before the guy even moved.
Yes. And that Hickson Gracie uses that expression, educated instincts. And I find that to be what like a
Mm,
nice summation of what you just said, because I think that it develops two different parts of your brains. I think or your brain, that executive function of can you think
yeah.
when you're when you're uncomfortable, that there's a great value to that. And at the same time, to educate the lizard brain to say when your body feels this, you do that. When there's like a puzzle piece that as you feel one thing happen, that you immediately go to another thing. That isn't in the executive function of the brain. So I find it that you're using so much of your capacity because you have to be instinctual in how you handle certain things, and then you have to be thoughtful as well, all within the context of both practice and competition, in my opinion.
I love what you just said that the way you said it, there's tremendous value in being uncomfortable. And so I appreciate that. So it's something that, I'm going to now use.
Okay, you send me your address, by the way. We're going to send you the "Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable" T-shirt along with some
Oh,
submission
literally a
copies.
t-shirt. I didn't even notice that.
Oh yeah,
But
this is our
I
thesis statement.
Oh, I love that. It's funny. I wear glasses. One day I was like perfect sight. Then 2 weeks later, I couldn't see anything. Even with glasses, I'm virtually blind.
It's funny you say that. I had 2015 vision for much of my life, and now I cannot read without glasses. And it's as you say. I think that I'm very committed to the notion that as you go along, there's much more available to us physically than society often feeds us. Like this is at this age, you give this thing up. However, there are certain inevitabilities. My eyes are what they are. They are old eyes, and that's that. Professor Dan, I could talk to you for a very long time about a lot of different subjects, and so hopefully you will come back with us. But I'm very grateful for you taking the time to talk with me. And Professor Lucas Hubo would have liked to have been here. He would have been a great addition to the conversation. But maybe on another podcast, the three of us can talk some more.
You got it. This complete pleasure was mine. Thank you.